All right, so we are now recording. We'll jump back in. We have flown over to Sweden to visit our dear friend Thomas Berglund of Brook, who's going to talk to us about his family's role on the estate, the history of the farm, the dairy, everything else that goes on in this wonderful place, and then a couple of the cheeses that we're importing from them as well, Rangebeck and Tegel. So Thomas, welcome. Thank you for joining us all the way from Sweden.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Good. We're happy to have you.
Nice to see some real people.
I know, even if through a computer screen. So I guess, John, the best place to start, you just talk to us about this rich, deep history of Brook and the beginnings of the estate and the farm.
Yes, well, farm was founded in August 1225. It's the goal of my stay here at Almes to be here when we celebrate the 800 years. It was founded by monks belonging to a monastery on the other side of the lake that you can't see, but it's about 200 yards in that direction. And it makes it one of the older farms in Sweden, I guess. The reason why we know that is because it was the same year, 1225, that the first book in the Swedish language was ever written. Before that, it was only Latin. And these were the laws that had been transferred in, what do you call it, oral tradition before, but at this point in time, it was written down. And in that text is described how the monks get their property rights, so to speak, for this piece of land here, which is today Almes. Then we belonged to the monks for 300 years, and then one of our kings turned us all into Protestants instead of Catholics because the Catholic Church was rich, and he preferred the king to be the owner of all that property. And after that, he was, and then it's gone and it's belonged to a lot of his son, sold to one of the noble families, and it's been in various noble families up until 1915, when my red-blooded, not blue-blooded, great grandfather bought Alnes, and so I'm fourth generation in this position.
And so was dairy and cheese production always happening on this farm back to the 1200s, or was that something that started more recently?
No, well, we can't compare with Gruyere. It's not fair to have Guion first, but I'll have to live with that. But our earliest accounts are from the 1600s, the 1700s, when people were paying their rent in cheese. A farm of this size, it's something like 7,000 to 8,000 acres, was divided up into smaller farms, sublet farms, then that had to pay their rent in natura, and so many of them paid in cheese. And unfortunately we don't know very much about that cheese. It'd be fantastic to have it today, but the origins of the Rangebeck cheese, which I see behind your head there, amazed how you moved yourself into our cellars that quickly. And it is from the, let's say, 1830s, 1840s, when we started making cheese seriously, and when cheese making started to get serious in Sweden at all. I mean, this is a sparsely populated country, and you could say that Stockholm, the biggest city, grew from 100,000 to 300,000 inhabitants between 1850 to 1900, and that's where we get that's when we start to get a decent sized market, and that's when cheese making starts to grow in Sweden. So it's about that time, and ever since then, more or less, cheese has been a focus here in one way or another.
And not to get off the topic of cheese, but can you talk a little bit about some of the other operations that have happened on the farm? Because I'm always fascinated by how many different things have come out of this estate. It's not just cheese making, right?
Oh, that could take for how long do we have, Doug? No, it started out, I guess, the earliest industrial activity is making tar. Tar was an immense export product, from given that we have so much forest. I mean, if you compare agricultural land to forest land, it's like, oh, 15, 20 to 1 in favor of forestry. So we have a lot of forest in Sweden, and so tar comes out of pine wood, etc. And that's been a very big export product. We also made, there were some ironworks here, and well, forestry was obviously been a big thing. We had a sawmill up until 1975, saltpeter, if that is the correct word in English, one of the components in black powder. That was mandatory to produce if you had cows. So many different activities through the years. Brick production, central to what we're doing today in a certain sense, ended in 1976 after 250 years. So we've done a lot of things here.
Yeah. And it's fascinating as a self-described history nerd. I love hearing about all those other aspects too. To get back to cheese, your family takes over the farm. Your family has continually produced cheese since they've taken over ownership?
No, we took over. The Wrongebæk cheese was in existence. The brand name was registered in 1889, April 8th, and is the oldest registered. The brand name of Wrongebæk cheese is the oldest registered cheese brand in Sweden. And when my ancestors took over in 1915, it was up and running, and quite a big production at the time. And that continued through the two wars, which we didn't take part in, but influenced a lot, and up until 1961. During the Second World War, fat was rationed, so nobody was allowed to produce cheese without skimming the fat first, because it was needed to feed people in other ways, soldiers, etc. But Wrongebæk cheese was one of two cheeses in Sweden that, for quality reasons, were allowed to continue production with the fat content that was, in our case, then full fat. And up until 1961, production continued, but we had the same, well, let's say, industrialization of the food chain that's happened everywhere else, but it was, I would say, the cooperatives got a very strong hold of the development. So everything was more or less merged or bought into 3 or 4 or 5 different companies, cooperatives, which meant that all small-scale production disappeared. Almost everything disappeared. So what we are part of is the reinvention of cheesemaking, of artisan cheesemaking in Sweden. Started about 15 years ago. So in 61, my father had to stop production. It was too difficult. And then after a short break, then of 47 years, we started up again.
And so you guys are a farmstead producer currently. When you took that pause in cheese production, there were still cows on the farm. There were still dairy production.
Yeah, it's only ever been our own milk, and I think we've had cows here documented for 400 or 500 years.
And so, what was the inspiration to restart the cheese making program? You know, after this long gap, were there other options that you guys felt were better? Like, what made you come back to the cheese making?
I think, to me, this is very much. I'm not a farmer. I'm a business major.
Yeah.
Studied marketing and so on. To me, it's a lot about rural development, about how, and I guess if you ask anyone, if you ask Guy, etc., it's so much about the possibility to make a living in the countryside. The development with the industrialization of everything that made us producers of commodity, which was where we were when my father retired and I took over. We were a fairly large scale commodity producer, milk, meat, grains, etc. But it does not pay enough for us to treat the animals rightly, to treat the land correctly, and to treat the people correctly. So we need to find a way to actually make more money. That's the crass way of looking at it. The fun part of it is that cheese is, in a way, a fantastic tool for that. Cheese can be bought for more or less nothing if it's made in a big factory in Holland. It can be bought for a fantastic price that's maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 times as high as the commodity cheese. And it gives you a tool to work with. And that's, I think that was my theoretical starting point,
Yeah.
why we should do this. And then I've discovered along the road that it's fun. You meet a lot of nice people. You get to go to America if you do well, and you meet nice French people, etc., etc. No, but it's that is the base for us, that we could not see a future as producers of commodities. So in 1990, 89, we turned organic. So you were then, to be precise, and no, it was 99. Sorry, and and then we and that was a starting point, and from there then on we've worked very determinedly to be the producers of something that is not a commodity,
Mm.
and the result is of course what's behind your back then, and why cheese? It was obvious. We had tradition.
Yeah.
There was so much tradition. We had bookkeeping from way back. We had the recipe. I found my father's cheesemakers from 1961. The cheesemaker, Mr. Stiller, he was of German descent. He was 82 years old. He could help us reconstruct the cheese. It helped us build a story, everything like that. So it was, well, self-evident.
Yeah.
Crazy, I would admit today, but that was the way. I could not foresee building a cow stable for 1,000 cows or 2,000 cows. It just didn't work with us. That's not the way we are.
Well, so far it seems to be that the decision is paying off for you. When cheese production did restart, was Rongebeck the first cheese and the only cheese that you started producing? Did you start with a full line of cheeses?
Now we've learned so much on the way, which is another way of saying that we didn't know anything when we started. And I knew that we had a story.
Mhm.
Of course, we own almost 800 years of history, and we had the product, we had the cheese, the Rongebeck cheese, and we knew that it had been popular in its day before, and but I was afraid that if we only had one cheese, what if we failed? What if the story was good, but nobody liked the cheese, and we weren't good enough to make the cheese? So we decided to make a couple of other ones. We have a couple of cheeses that are very small in volume, but number two after Rongebeck is the Alnes Tegel, or the brick cheese then. And um, it's only after that we've learned that in our model country, so to speak, uh, where we are taking inspiration from, given that my mother was Swiss also, the specialized dairies are making one cheese, like Walter,
Right.
for example. And maybe if we'd had that history, we would have changed. But it was a way of not putting all the eggs in one basket, or however you want to put it.
Sure.
And it's worked out.
Yeah. Um, let's talk about Tegel a little bit. Because we obviously first started importing Rongebeck, but Tegel is new to a lot of people. I know there's some people on right now who have had the Rongebeck in their shops previously. This is a cheese that we had previously imported, but had stopped and is starting again. And we've kind of gone through some production changes. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we've worked together to tweak that process, and just a little more about the original version of Tegel and what we're starting to see now, because we have some of those new batches going out to people.
Yes. Um, the Tegel gave us some headaches in the first years. We started out again, by the way, in 2008 and started making both those cheeses. Uh, Rongebeck turned out well from the beginning, moody, but well. But we weren't satisfied with the Tegel, and the reason was that we didn't get the culture going properly while washing the rind. They tended not to develop the rind properly, and that made them dry, and that also developed taste poorly. So we could wait for 20, 25 months, etc. But we didn't think we didn't get the texture we wanted. We didn't get the taste or aroma development that we wanted. And it was only after we had a visitor. We owe Walter Ress a lot. Um, he pointed us to an advisor in Switzerland. I mean, in Sweden you can't find this because we have so little artisan production. Switzerland, they're pros. You can buy advice from semi-state organizations, etc. And we found a person there through Walter, and he came up and he made cheese together with us, and he showed us where we were failing, that we weren't washing the the Tego. So we added a new schedule and put in a lot of more hours, and actually the Tegel is now such that we are closing in on Walter's way of not even looking at the cheese if it feels right. I mean, he told us he doesn't taste the cheese. That was a novelty to us. That if he feels that it turned out right, he doesn't have to taste the cheese. We're there with the Tegel right now. We feel very happy about the way it's been developing. But it was mainly a problem of getting the culture to the Brevibacterium linens to make it develop itself or establish itself on the surface properly. Once we had that and the frequency in washing increased, it helped so much. And it's a completely different cheese in my opinion. We're very confident with it right now.
Great. And so in its original format, this is, for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's a 60-pound brick of cheese with almost 4 sections to it, 4 footprints, which is an homage to the brick factory. But now what we're doing is getting these quarters, which previously we had been getting quarters from you once the cheese had aged. Now we're getting it, the quarters are cut from the freshly molded cheese, correct?
Yep.
How has that process changed the cheese? Has that been difficult? Do you think that's helped?
I think, well, you should ask Mr. Richardson. It's his invention from the beginning. What do you say, Jonathan?
Well, I'm really impressed with how things turned out. So just to give background, I came and visited about 2 years ago right now, I think. It was February of 2019. And after spending a couple days and looking at production, you and I discussed Tegel being a cheese that we both really like, and then being able to sort of find a more manageable format. So for us, while I just very much appreciate the cheese in its original form, the concern I had is that it's a very big piece of cheese. Since then we've had tariffs, we've had currency issues, so it ends up being quite an investment for the whole form. So what we had originally discussed was doing quarters, which is something that is very manageable in the short term to sort of cut at completion of production, and was giving us, frankly, a really good example of Tegel. I'm not concerned with the quarters that are managed that way. But we decided to do a little experiment where I believe you took, was it 2 full forms and did the kind of brining process?
Yes.
Yeah. So took 2 full forms and quartered them, and then brined them individually as quarters, and for kind of a varying amount of time. So if I recall, it's something like 24 to 60 hours, more or less. Or what's your typical brine on Tegel?
24 normally.
Yeah.
No, 48. 48.
Okay, right. So it's from 48 to, and Doug, what was the longest that you?
We received 4, I believe it was 48, 52, 56, and 60 hours.
Yes. And as I recall it, you liked the one with the longest time in the brine.
We did. The
Yes.
preference was towards 56 hours and 60 hours, which mostly everyone received.
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting. There was a little interest in the 48-hour one. It seemed that it had a different profile. We preferred those other two, but the 48-hour one was just a little more subtle and complex in a way that the other two weren't. But we like the flavors most out of those longer brine batches.
Right. And I think for what for not only what the cheese is it reflects really well in that way, but I think that also, and this I think is what Doug and I were talking about a little bit last week, is how much it's presenting as a counterpoint to Vrengebeck. It really does, you can, I think you can taste that they're from the same place and that they're of the same milk, but I think that they're really divergent, particularly in those kind of longer brined examples. It just, for whatever reason, it just kind of really made the point. But yeah, so I mean, of course, part of what we were talking about with ghee, and then comes up again, is so I was there 2 ago and by experiment, and now the cheese is on people's plates. We've, I think, determined that this is the direction to go. See you in 2 years. Like there's time scales are, I think that sometimes it's easy for me to think about, like, oh well, you've been around since 1200, I've been around since 1976. Like, this is, these are manageable time scales. I think that in the meantime, we will be looking at porters that are cut post-production. I don't think you did any other wheels.
Oh, that was a test run. Yeah.
It was just a test run.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to try to put together a projection with Melissa and Doug to see, if I could predict 2023 right now, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would be on my yacht somewhere. But I think that we can come up with a reasonable expectation to, especially as great as those cheeses are tasting. So I guess I'll let you guys continue your conversation. But when you taste the 60 hour or the 48 hour or whatever, how does it reflect with what your impression is of Tegel? What do you expect from Tegel? And then, I don't know, what's the variation on your end?
I think it'll be very interesting to hear the reactions of the people over there, your customers, and to see what they think. I worried about the cheese maybe getting too, but since we had a history of the cheese being too dry, and we didn't like it that way at all, and didn't develop taste and the texture, etc. I was worried that it might go in that direction, but it hasn't. Not from what I tasted and from what we sent over to you. It is the same cheese. I think it is the same cheese as the brick, and I can confirm that both Rongebeck and Tegel are made in the same place and of the same milk. But
I mean, I just mean that they really kind of reflect two sides of what that milk can do. They're steered in very different ways. I think that our concern sometimes, as you were saying, with a specialized producer, Walter Ross makes a cheese that is more like a traditional Appenzeller that he sells just in mid-dairy. We've discussed at times, well, what would it be like to bring that in as well? And to be honest, like it's a delicious cheese, and we loved his Appenzeller when he was still making Appenzeller regularly. But I don't think that there's that same kind of divergence, where I think that Vrengebeck and Tegel are divergent enough that they could be side by side on the counter. They're not out of place together. It does not.
Well, they're very different. Yeah, they're very different cheeses. Yes, they are. I mean, the Tegel has this. Rongebeck obviously has a lot of has a bit of acidity to it, which given the way it's produced, the Tegel doesn't have at all. It has to me the aromas. It's sweet. It's a little bit buttery, and that makes it a completely different cheese from the Rongebeck. And when we sell it here in Sweden, it's got two audiences that very distinctly distinguish between the two of them. So I agree with you that works out. They're different, but from the same source. And given I've often thought about that, my starting point was business-like. Why did we do this? We wanted to develop our farm, etc., like that. But I'm getting more and more amazed by the magic of what cheese can turn out to be. I mean, you use the same milk from one place, you bring it to the dairy, and well, I don't need to preach for the people who already know all this, but it's amazing. But we're really happy with the way the Tegel is turning out, the consistency of it, most of all. They're they're consistent to an extent where we actually taste them when we're right before we're going to start cutting them and selling them, and it works out to quarter them the way we did for you too. Then I lost the thread of it there.
Well, no, I think I think that what you're pointing out is that, yeah, and I really liked your point earlier about being just as you're kind of narrowing the bandwidth on the cheeses a little bit, and they're predictive, more predictive now, and that you can be a little more predictive in the way the cheeses are going to be. I mean, over time, and over time, you and I, it took a while to get Rungebäck where we wanted it to be as an export product. You know, it was a process. Tegel is kind of funny because it is just a little more stable. I mean, and I don't know if that's a function of the age, if that's a function of the kind of rind construction or kind of design, but it is just like it's an eminently stable and consistent cheese from what we're seeing now, which is wonderful. If I might ask you, because it's been a while since we had a chance to catch up, how is you're a year in your new barn now?
Yes. No, well, 5, 6 months.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you started building about a year ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And how is that going? And how is milk production? You had discussed last year when we spoke about decreasing milk production.
Yes.
And kind of doing a breed transition. Where are you in that process right now?
Well, we're milking since it's robot milking then, 3 of them, and we're milking since September 30th, and the transition has gone really well.
Yeah.
The cows are healthy. They're producing a lot of milk. We have, instead of 350, 375 size herd, we have 240. Because that produces the milk that we currently need and can process in our dairy, and we did not want to we didn't want to invest into commodity milk production. So if the day comes when we need more milk to make cheese, then maybe we'll make a larger size herd. But we can still make a lot of cheese of the milk that we have today. Some of it goes to the dairy still. Then. But we're very happy with it. We are very happy with the fact that I was there last night for about an hour looking at the cows and the calves. The calves are fantastic. I've never seen healthier looking calves, which is to me the most important factor of all, that if we are to hold animals in husbandry the way we do, we carry the burden of making damn sure that they're being healthy and so on. And that, I mean, that's not going to be a lighter burden to carry. We need to prove ourselves worthy of doing that. We are also having the first calves of the Brown Swiss. First one was born on my daughter's birthday, October 27th last year. We wanted to name it Maria, but she refuses, claiming she's not a cow. So about this time we have, let's say, 25, 30 calves, heifer calves of that breed. Being organic, we cannot import animals. We cannot do embryo transfers, so we have to breed through artificial insemination. But they look real nice. They look fantastic, the calves. Never seen them. It looks like they're getting, I don't know, shampoo every afternoon or something.
That really speaks to like long-term sustainability in real terms, which is very good to hear. Yeah.
So, and the other breed is Holstein, for those who don't know.
Yes, the one we had before, yeah.
What percentage now with those new calves are Holstein, and what percentage are Brown Swiss, give or take?
100% brown Swiss. We're leaving Holstein.
But do you have Holstein at all on the farm?
Oh yes, yes. The cows that are milking still,
Yeah.
we do. We don't have any milking brown Swiss because we cannot buy animals. We're not allowed to do that as an organic farm, and we're not allowed to use embryo transfer either. So we're just going to have to cross for 3 or 4 generations. So this will take time.
Right.
But so the milk is still black and white, so to speak. Uh, but we've made decent cheese with that milk. So this we're hoping will be a plus. We're investing in the future, so to speak, and it's one, of course, milk quality, because we know that the brown Swiss produce very good milk for cheese making. But two is the overall health and robustness of these animals. We want to have cows that live for a long time. We think that's what we demand from ourselves, and also what we think that the future demands. We don't cows that seems very often live 3-4 years and then they're butchered, and that won't do in the future. So we're very happy with the transition.
As you guys begin to transition, and obviously this is a little further out, do you anticipate any production changes because you're switching breeds, or will the milk not vary that drastically?
It'll be some time before that shows, so we're not really worried. I think we'll probably be adjusting without even noticing it over time. And it's like Jonathan says here, that the perspectives are so long. We're not talking about 5 months time. We're talking about 5 years, 10 years, etc. And so what we're trying to build, we're building for the future. We're going to be doing this for many years after I'm gone. So that's a perspective that we have on the horizon, which is also a fun part, because it's a bit like planting a tree. You might not be able to see it, a full-grown oak, but you can imagine it. You can envision it.
I love that. It's a great metaphor. Jonathan, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have to add that I'm buying my tickets for 2025.
Oh, I can't wait.
Like I think that's a good time scale right there, right?
Yeah,
I think so.
You did virtual open farm last year? What do you perceive is going to be your midsummer plans? What does open farm look like this year? Like, is there any way for you to kind of see where we're headed?
we haven't decided yet, but maybe we'll do something like, if we, let's say we think we have an audience, people that follow us, and we reported to them what was about the new stables and then the new barn, etc., like that, and the change of breed. Maybe we should show them how far we gotten, that we started milking. Give them some reports about that. Show them the first calves. We definitely will do that, and also discuss a bit about how with what we haven't talked about here yet. I just remember, Jonathan, I have something for you, a challenge before we get off. Yeah, but we're increasing production. We've had 2 years in a row with 25% increases in sale, and it's getting difficult with most Swedish customers because we can't deliver cheese to all of them. So we upped the production now, but we try to do it very carefully. Kerstin and Tommy, the cheesemakers, they want to secure quality above all. That's the most important thing. And when you add on new people, we got some new people coming in, helping us to make more cheese, and so that nobody has to work too much, because it's hard work then. And so we're from this week now, we're beginning to make cheese 5 days a week.
That's great.
And we were on, well, a year ago we started making 4 days a week, and we increased the batch sizes by about 30%, going from 36 Brongebeck to 48. But demand has been such that we really had to do something. But then we got this other thing going. You know the Marathon du Médoc, Jonathan? You know about that?
No. Oh,
It's
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
marathon where you go drink wine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You have the stations or where you go drink wine. We're June 12th this year. You don't have to this year if you can't for travel restrictions, but June 12th, we're going to do the test run. We're going to run from town, which is 6 kilometers, as you remember from here, and do a half a marathon, 22 kilometers or something.
Yeah.
And we're organizing to that together with all the other food producers, I mean local food producers here in the area, a food marathon, a gourmet or gastronomical semi-marathon.
It sounds a
And
little dangerous. I really like the idea.
yes, and I am looking forward to see Mr. Richardson here. Maybe
Yeah,
not this year, but
I'm
you're
in
going
for
to have
that.
to buy. And there's a lot of people watching here. I see several names here that will help me hold you to it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Oh, I'm in. You also do a version where you have
The kick sledge.
kick sled. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be something too. Well, it's kind of fun too. I think we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago together with there's somebody who actually has buffaloes here in the vicinity. Somebody does asparagus, and June obviously is the right time. Strawberries, what have you. You have a lot of local food production here, and people were like crazy. Everybody wants to do something. Everybody wants to find a project, to work together, to see a face again, etc., like that. Even if, I mean, this year we have no idea about the restrictions, but we're going to run. If it's one or two, I might not run, but
No, but I think that's been like some of the result of what we've all been going through globally is that it's about finding these like moments of for lack of a better word, kind of transcendence, and where we can actually spend some time together and celebrate that kind of community. I love that idea. I don't know if you've been made aware yet, but we just brought in the first round of cheeses from an Estonian cheesemaker that we met in Paris last year. So, you know, my dream now is to just like go live in Scandinavia for like 6 months, you know, and I can just sort of like just fly into St. Petersburg, make my way all the way across Northern Europe. But I think we're 2025 is probably the right time horizon for that.
yeah, I met the Estonians a couple of years ago, and
Did you? Yeah, Andre. Yeah.
I did, and I think they're interesting people, and it is an interesting story. I mean, the Baltic countries, the history for them to try to do something like this is quite an achievement.
It is, and the cheese is really, it's just like, it's different, it's delicious. I think that there's a lot of, inside of Colombia, there's a lot of feeling like when we met you, it's like, oh, I mean, we didn't, you know, Adam's joke was always like, have you ever had a good cheese from Sweden? And then people would say, oh, and they taste Ronneberg and be like, wow. And it's kind of nice to just see what's going on outside of these kind of established capitals, to see the innovation that's going on, to see people like really making a go of it. It's a fun process. So I'm excited for you to taste their cheese again, if it's been a minute. Yeah, it's always been such a joy to watch you connect and to the relationships you have with some other people we work with. Like this, you know, it in some ways, and not to get too deep into it, but like it's that global community that I think we've really been missing over the last 12 months. Is being able to spend that time together and kind of have a kind of just understand where we all are, to take the temperature of what the global industry feels like on our little tiny small scales, you know. So I look forward to.
And it's nice to think that we don't lock ourselves up in our country and only look inwards. I understand that many have been in a position where it's been really important to try to reach out and try to help and so on. But I still think I have colleagues in Norway. I know them fairly well. Norway is as close as Canada is when it comes to food import, etc. But they're only buying Norwegian cheese right now, and there are good people in Italy making cheese. I've met them. There are good, fantastic cheesemakers in America. I've met them. And I think it makes it also us all so much richer to share this all over. We were working on trying to gather the Scandinavian cheesemakers at a meeting here in Almnäs right before COVID hit. We were going to have last May. We were going to have them all here, and to teach inspired by your CMI, of course, to bring Norwegians, Danish, and Swedish here to Almnäs and present to start teaching the Scandinavian cheesemongers. And our journey hasn't even started compared to yours there. We have so much more to learn about Norwegian cheeses, about Danish cheeses, etc., like that. So that was a project we had started because we feel maybe we've been lucky, maybe we've made a couple of friends, and be fun to try to use these ideas that we've learned from abroad to I think by raising the awareness of Scandinavian cheese, right, we're all doing each other a favor. And the same goes nationally.
And I think we've only learned that more over the last year. You know, I talked to Tom Chatfield a lot, and we've been discussing some of the just projects he works. You know, it's just it's nice to know that like things are still moving, and we'll all be around the table soon, hopefully.
That's good.
Yeah.
That sounds like a promise, Jonathan.
Please. It is. Speaking of good times, it looks like we have a question about wine or beer pairing with Rungebäck. So you have to imagine that it's not just World Cup season, but you're having a beer just on a normal day. What's your preference there?
If it's a beer, it would be I think it would obviously not be a light lager. It would be something heavier. I don't know if it's very helpful, but it would be in the direction of a pale ale.
Yeah,
something to match.
My preference is an IPA with it.
Yes, and it would be something to match, especially if it's a Rongebeck that's a little bit older. So an IPA, I think, would be nice. And there's so many to choose from.
I tend to say this for most cheese, but I think with Rongebeck in particular, I like beer better than wine. Just the carbonation with that fat content is just, it does something for it. It's so much better to me.
It's like you say, the fat content, the fat is very, it doesn't sound so nice, but the fat is very present, right. Especially at the end of when you taste a piece of Rongebeck, it's very present there. The melting characteristic that sort of turns into the fat feel, and then to have something that clean that up a bit is nice. Yeah.
Speaking of fat in the Rongebeck, I'm about 5 minutes from falling into a deep rabbit hole about milk policies during the war. Until you brought that up, it had never occurred to me that there were strictures in place about skimming the fat to use in wartime. And I have to admit that I did a 2-second Google search after you said that and found 10 academic papers about like the way that fats were diverted during the war. And now I can't, like, it just wasn't on my radar. Because like we've always thought about it in terms of heavy skims and it being like very typical in order to have cooking oil, to have like, you know, cooking fats in some of these kind of heavy dairy countries, but it had never occurred to me that this was also a wartime provision. So thank you for that. That's gonna be fun reading later today.
The Rongebeck was requisitioned during the war for the Swedish troops that never saw action, but it was requisitioned, and it wasn't a family member, but the manager of the farm there, because we sort of in between. My grandfather died in 1934 and my father who took over in 1960. But the manager of Alnäs, then he went to Stockholm. He didn't think that the Rongebeck was cheese suitable for the GIs. That's the American term, isn't it? So he went to Stockholm to meet the Minister of Agriculture to protest against that, and he wasn't allowed in. And then, but he sat in the waiting room or the and told, well, he'll wait. So we waited until he was received by the Minister of Agriculture, and when by the time he left, the Wrongebeck cheese was exempt for being requisitioned for the army.
That's pretty amazing. It's good history.
Hmm.
Doug, we have another question, yeah?
Yes, we got one more, and I think this is a longer conversation. We've actually been talking about this with the Estonian cheese as well. Thomas, if you were selling Wrongebeck to a customer, how would you describe it, and what would your reference point be for what it is like? This is something that comes up all the time with Wrongebeck. We refer to it as unicorn cheese sometimes because it is so unique, and it's kind of hard to peg down. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this.
I also find it difficult to find a reference point for it. At some time, Hervé Mons compared it to a Dutch Gouda, a quality one, but I've really not found anything things entirely like it. But when I describe it, I'd say that when you taste a young Wrongebeck, the presence there is a presence of acidity, lactic acidity, lactic freshness, a lot of the saline part, the saltiness, as it and the texture. I think the most prominent feature or characteristic of a Wrongebeck is actually the creaminess. The way it melts in the mouth, and as the Wrongebeck gets older, you get more and more of vegetal umami, of barnyard, animal barnyard, well, vegetal or animal umami. I don't know if you distinguish with that, but it gets more marrow somehow, and and um, and you still got the salt is also very distinguishable, and also I think what we talked about before. It has a high fat content and it's very noticeable, especially in the sort of aftertaste. You feel how much that it is a full fat cheese. I don't know how much value that is as a description, but Douglas here has a fantastic schedule that he can send over to anybody interested, which we did in August. That describes a little bit this development. But that's how I see the Wrongebeck. There's also, I almost regret saying this, but if you ever taste a 25-month Wrongebeck, it's a bomb. It's an absolute bomb of taste. There's so much in it too, I like it very much, and we're very proud of it. But I don't know really what to compare it to. You people are probably the better judges of that because you've tasted many more different cheeses than I ever have.
Well, but I think, Doug and I were discussing this earlier this week and last week, and I think that our issue comes in where you don't want to pigeonhole or undercut what is like a really dynamic cheese. So comparing it to a Dutch cheese is, maybe there's a textural component. Comparing it to a cheddar, a British kind of like cloth-bound cheddar gives you some kind of reference point for like acidity or textural qualities. Comparing it to a mountain cheese gives you some idea, but at that point, why not just taste it? And I realize that like part of the reason that this comes up is during this era right now, it's very difficult for people to do sampling. We are finding it necessary to verbalize things that we wish we didn't have to verbalize. We could just taste and let people determine on their own, but such is life. But yeah, I think it's Adam always falls back on snackable, and I think it is just so snackable. Like, what's it taste like? It tastes like something you want to keep eating. Like, just which doesn't help, I know, but
no, but it's
I've heard him talk about mashed peas and fudginess, etc. Your language is so much richer than ours, and that's
his is
yeah.
I don't know about mine.
But I've heard just like you said, that just reminded me. I've heard comparisons to cheddar. Yes, there are components which are the richness somehow, which are shared with a cheddar, but it's not a cheddar,
No.
and it could never be exactly one. I've heard comparisons to Alpine cheeses, well, cooked cheese then, which is not. But it has some traits of that too. So maybe it's somewhere in between. But it's well, it is a unicorn.
And it's tough because we walk this fine line of, like Jonathan said, right now it's hard to, we can't sample. So how do you describe it to a customer? And it has these qualities of Alpine and cheddar, but it's not. And you don't want to, label it as such. And that's how people remember it. And there are sometimes too where people, I don't need another cheddar. I don't need another Alpine, and it feels like it does a disservice to the cheese when that happens. So we're always hesitant to kind of slap a label on it like that. But it's also, like we said, a little necessary right now. I also like we had the cellar sessions way back at the start of the world we're living in. Benjamin Roberts talking about it. Just it's salty and it's sweet. Two things that everybody really enjoys, these two flavor profiles that just appeal to so many people. And that's something that I like to harken back to when describing Rangebeck, is that you're going to like that it's salty and it's sweet. And it's very simple and basic, but it describes it.
So I didn't know, but there's no sampling allowed whatsoever in the US?
District by district.
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know in some cases it was allowed and no longer is allowed. It's it depends where you are.
Well, it makes the business a bit difficult, I have to say, given that people are supposed to taste something to determine if they like it or not.
Correct. I don't see any more questions coming in.
No, I think it's wonderful. It's so good to catch up. I mean, I think Doug and I both have the issue with you, Thomas, where we could have a 9-hour Zoom call with you, and then forget to talk about cheese. So I'm glad we talked about cheese this time. I think we did a good job.
Well, I hope we haven't bored too many people. But there's a lot of interesting stuff around it. I mean, it means so much, and I think we've reached a platform for our cheese production and what we're doing in on this. We set up goals that we were going to try to establish a cheese that with some international reputation, and we think we've done fairly well, and been helped very much. But we have noted, just like you said about the Estonian cheese, that in the international place, in the international cheese world, there was room for a Swedish cheese, maybe even two, and that's a void that we've tried to fill out with something. Like Adam says, have you ever tried a Swedish cheese? Why not? Yeah. And it's also been the same here in Sweden, where we see that there was nothing between very small scale artisanal cheese and the industrial cheese. So the wholesalers here, well, to put it bluntly, they have us to turn to, because all other artisan cheese production is so much smaller, and so there's really, it is almost, we didn't know this, but it's almost as if well, Sweden and it was waiting for, there was a hole to fill, sort of a place to position oneself, and well, it's a very good feeling. We feel very good about that.
We've enjoyed it also. Okay, well, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful to chat, and I so much look forward to. There's so many people left in America, so many good cheese people that I'd like to meet and get to know. Not to mention the ones I already know. So I'm really looking forward to being able to travel. What the one good thing about this, or one of the good things, is we're really cherished when we really can meet again.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll be so much more worth than it when it was routine somehow. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you everyone else for joining us as well.